The moment I realized my husband was lying to me, it wasn't because I caught him cheating, it was because of a grocery receipt, a small, ordinary piece of paper that fell out of his jacket pocket when I picked it up from the couch. At first, I almost threw it away without looking, but something about the date caught my attention. It was from a store across town, a place neither of us ever went, and the time printed on the receipt was 9:47 p.m. The problem was that same night, he told me he was working late at the office. For a second, I stared at the receipt like it was written in a language I didn't understand. Then I laughed, because it seemed ridiculous to doubt him over something so small. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who lied. At least that's what I had believed for the past 3 years. To everyone who knew him, Daniel looked like the perfect partner. He remembered birthdays, he opened doors, he cooked dinner on Sundays, and always texted me when he arrived at work. When my friends met him, they would pull me aside and say the same thing. You got lucky, and honestly, I thought I had. Daniel was patient, reliable, calm, the kind of man who made you feel safe, which is why that tiny piece of paper felt so strange in my hands. Because perfect men don't need to lie about where they buy groceries, right? I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he stopped there on the way home from work. Maybe he forgot. Maybe. Then something else caught my eye. At the bottom of the receipt, 2 items, wine and flowers. My stomach tightened. Daniel hadn't brought wine home that night, and he definitely hadn't brought me flowers. For a long moment, I just stood there in the quiet living room, the clock ticking softly on the wall, and for the first time in 3 years, a thought entered my mind that I didn't want to believe. What if I didn't actually know the man I married? When Daniel walked through the door that evening, he kissed my forehead the way he always did. "Hey, Em," he said, warm, easy, normal. I held the receipt behind my back. "Long day?" I asked. He sighed dramatically. "You have no idea." And that was the moment everything changed, because suddenly I was no longer hearing the words of a loving husband. I was hearing a lie, a small one, maybe meaningless, but small lies are like cracks in glass. Once you notice them, you start seeing how far they spread. And I had no idea that this tiny crack was about to shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. When I met Daniel, I was 32 and exhausted with dating. You know the kind of exhaustion I mean? The kind that comes after years of awkward first dates, vague text messages, and men who disappear the moment things start getting serious. So when Daniel appeared in my life, he felt like a miracle. We met at a bookstore. Not a dating app, not a bar, an actual bookstore. He helped me reach a novel from the top shelf. We started talking. 40 minutes later, we were still standing in the same aisle discussing our favorite authors. By the end of the week, we had our first real date. By the end of the month, I had already introduced him to my sister. Daniel made everything feel easy. He listened carefully when I spoke. He remembered details about my childhood. He even wrote little notes and left them in my lunch bag when I had stressful work days. "Just a reminder," one note said, "that someone believes in you." Who wouldn't fall in love with a man like that? Our relationship moved quickly. Within a year, we were engaged. A year after that, we were married. Looking back, people often ask if there were warning signs, and honestly, I didn't see any. Daniel never raised his voice. He never acted jealous. He never gave me a reason to doubt him. If anything, he seemed almost too good to be true. But sometimes the most dangerous secrets hide behind the most perfect smiles. The first time I mentioned the receipt, Daniel barely reacted. "Oh, that?" he said casually. "I stopped at a store after work." "Across town?" I asked. He shrugged. "Traffic was bad near the office." The explanation sounded logical, reasonable, and for a moment I felt embarrassed for even asking. but something about the way he said it bothered me. Not the words, the tone, too smooth, too quick. Like he had answered the question before I finished asking it. Still, I let it go, because love teaches you to trust. Or sometimes, it teaches you how to ignore the things that make you uncomfortable. But the strange thing about lies is that they rarely stay small, and once I noticed that first crack, I started seeing others. The next sign appeared a week later. It was a Wednesday evening, and Daniel told me he had a late meeting. That wasn't unusual. His job in marketing often required long hours. But around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my friend Claire. "Are you at the restaurant on Pine Street tonight?" I frowned. "No, why?" Her reply came quickly. "Because I swear I just saw Daniel here." My chest tightened. For a moment, I just stared at the message. Then I typed slowly. "Are you sure?" Claire sent a photo. It was blurry, taken quickly, but there was no mistaking him. Daniel was sitting at a table near the window. Across from him was another woman. They weren't touching, they weren't even sitting close, but they were smiling, and he looked relaxed, comfortable, not like a man trapped in a boring business meeting. My hands started to shake, not from anger, from confusion, because if Daniel was cheating, why would he lie so casually? Why not just say he was meeting a friend? Why invent a work meeting? When he came home that night, I watched him carefully. The same routine, shoes off by the door, briefcase on the table, a kiss on my cheek. "How was your meeting?" I asked. "Long," he said, "exhausting." Another lie, and this time I knew it. I thought about showing him the photo, demanding an explanation, but something stopped me. Instinct. A quiet voice inside my head saying, "Don't confront him yet. Find out the truth first." Because suddenly this didn't feel like a simple misunderstanding. It felt like a story with missing pieces. And the deeper I started looking, the stranger everything became. 2 days later, I followed him. I hated myself for it. I hated the suspicion, the secrecy, but the truth mattered more than my pride. Daniel told me he was going to the gym after work. Instead, I watched him drive across town. Not to a gym, not to a restaurant, but to a small house in a quiet neighborhood. He parked in the driveway, then he went inside. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. For 15 minutes I sat in my car staring at the front door. Then it opened. The woman from the restaurant stepped outside. She was holding a little boy's hand, maybe 6 years old. Daniel walked behind them, and when the boy tripped on the sidewalk, Daniel immediately reached down and lifted him into his arms, not awkwardly, not like someone unfamiliar with children, but naturally, comfortably, like a father. My world tilted. I stepped out of the car before I could stop myself. "Daniel!" He froze. The boy looked at me with wide eyes. The woman went pale, and Daniel closed his eyes, like someone who knew this moment had been coming. "You followed me," he said quietly. "Who is that?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. Daniel looked down at the boy. "This is Liam." The boy smiled shyly. "Hi." I felt my knees weaken. "And who is she?" Daniel hesitated. "Her name is Anna." Silence filled the air. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. "How long?" Daniel's shoulders dropped. "Before we met." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Liam is my son." The truth came slowly after that. Years before Daniel met me, he had been in a relationship with Anna. They were young, unstable, constantly arguing. When Anna became pregnant, Daniel panicked. He left, not proudly, not easily, but he left. For years, he avoided responsibility, until 2 years ago. Around the same time we started dating, Anna contacted him again. She needed help raising Liam. Daniel decided to reconnect, but he was afraid I would leave if I knew the truth. So instead of trusting me, he hid it. Every late meeting, every strange errand, every quiet lie, they were visits with his son. Standing there on that sidewalk, I felt two emotions fighting inside me: anger and heartbreak. Not because Daniel had a child, but because he didn't trust me enough to tell me. I could have understood, I said softly. Daniel looked down. I know, but now I don't know who you are. That was the real damage, not the secret, the years of deception. Trust is fragile, and once it breaks, even the truth can feel uncertain. It took months of long conversations, therapy, and painful honesty before we understood what our future would look like. Some couples might not survive something like that. And honestly, for a while, I wasn't sure we would either. But secrets only have power when they stay hidden, and the moment the truth finally came out, everything changed, not instantly, not magically, but honestly. Today, Liam calls me Emma when he visits on weekends. Anna and I have learned to speak without resentment, and Daniel has spent years proving that honesty matters more than perfection. Because the biggest lesson I learned from that tiny grocery receipt is this: the perfect partner doesn't exist, but the right one will eventually tell you the truth, even when they're afraid it might cost them everything.